Hi, this is James White once again from Valley Broadcast Network. Thanks so much for joining me here today. And I am delighted to be joined once again by Commissioner Randy Pinocci, who is now running for Lieutenant Governor on the Tanner Smith ticket. And he is here with us today to discuss his candidacy, to discuss Tanner Smith and the ideas that he and Tanner have for Montana when they become elected, when they get elected governor here coming up in November. And Commissioner Pinocci has been on the broadcast many times previously, and we're delighted to have him here once again today on Valley Broadcast Network. Commissioner Pinocci, thanks so much for joining us here, and I will give you a proper introduction here in just a moment. Can you hear me okay, sir?
I hear you fine.
Yeah, thanks for joining us here, and I will give you a proper introduction here, and here we go. Appointed Lieutenant Governor Randy Pinocci. Randy Pinocci, born in Anaconda in 1964, hails from a family of Italian immigrants who worked at the Anaconda smelter in the 1800s. His father, Louis Pinocci, spent 27 years at the smelter before transitioning from Democrat to Republican due to his beliefs about the working class. Following his upbringing in a Democrat household, Randy delved into politics in the 1990s, advocating for Second Amendment rights. His efforts caught the attention of Conrad Burns, leading to his movement in the Second Amendment Committee within Burns' Senate campaign. Known for his work with the Montana shooting sports community, Randy now serves as vice president of the Montana Shooting Sports Association. As a former representative of Great Falls in the Sun River Valley, Randy supported energy-related legislation and eventually pursued a role on the Montana Public Service Commission to address energy concerns and advocate for the construction of a nuclear power plant in Montana to boost local energy production and reduce costs. Public Service Commissioner Randy Pinocci, thanks again so much for joining us here today. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
It is indeed. And it's been a while since I've had you on the broadcast. Lots happened since then. And one of the major things is you are now on the ticket for Lieutenant Governor with Tanner Smith. We had Tanner Smith here on the show. Oh, it was probably last October, maybe, or November, I think. We had him on the broadcast. So a lot of great things. He was here in studio. You are not in studio today, but that doesn't matter. We're still going to be able to get your points across just as well. Again, what precipitated, if we can just start off with this, Commissioner, what precipitated you to want to run for Lieutenant Governor? You've done, I think, many would say, a fine job as a public service commissioner, and I'm assuming you're trying to springboard from that activity into lieutenant governor. And what was your motivation for wanting to run?
Well, let's turn the clock back about 6 months. We had Rosendale was planning to run against Sheehy, which I supported heavily, and I think that the public in Montana, they feel that they want to pick who our leadership is in the state. A lot of people are very uncomfortable that they felt that Daines and Greg Gianforte selected Sheehy and said, well, he's going to be our next senator. I think there's a lot of negative thoughts about that. I think people that are going to run for a very important office like U.S. Senate or U.S. Congress really should come up through the ranks. They should have served in the legislature, develop a voting record, show that they have a voting record to stand on. How do they rate with the Second Amendment? How do they rate with Christian issues, right? Christian values. So it's very surprising to me when we're going to bring somebody in from maybe out of state or has no experience at all and say, you're going to run for U.S. Senate. So I think the people were really expecting Rosendale to take that spot. He earned it. He had the voting record in the legislature. He had an incredible voting record in Congress and still does today. So he really, I think, met the qualifications. My plan was to run for U.S. Congress to replace Rosendale. I talked to his staff about that. I talked to grassroots, and my district in the Public Service Commission is very close to the district for Congress on the eastern part of the state. Well, more importantly, we have term limits, and I respect term limits, and I cannot run for the Public Service Commission again. So it was pretty obvious where my grassroots felt that I had a good voting record in the legislature and that I understood energy pretty well, and I'm trying to be a leader in the energy industry across the country, introducing legislation to encourage high performance power lines, which we did a show on with you. And we introduced legislation and got it passed. And Montana is the leader in high performance power lines across the United States, and I'm recognized nationally on that. So we had a good plan to work on energy and go forward in US Congress. Well, Rosendale uh, runs for US Senate for about a week or two and then drops out and goes back to staying in the House. So Tanner calls me and says, I think you're the perfect fit to be lieutenant governor. And it was a transition that I thought, well, I don't know. I've never run in Missoula County or Gallatin County or Yellowstone County, right? Um, but I do think that the lieutenant governor position um, would have a good fit of somebody whose focus is in energy. And we have tremendous energy concerns, I think, facing Montana. And I thought, you know what, that'll be a good fit. And he felt that I needed to take this position, so I accepted, and that's how we got here. Yeah.
You know, one of the things, Commissioner, that gives you, I think, a leg up, you and Tanner both, are that you're both Montanans. You're both born in Montana and been here, I think, by you. I think for your bio, sounds like it goes back to the 1800s with your family. I know Tanner's generational. His family's generational here in Montana, and people may say, "Well, that's no big deal," but then that's important. I think that's important because there's a certain kind of Montana values that people have, that grew up here have. And a lot of those have been eroded, I think, unfortunately, by folks that have come in without those same values. But there's still a good core, and I think that's important, and I hope the voters see it that way. I'm sure I should say I hope you probably hope the voters see it that way as well, as an asset. Both you and Tanner being authentic Montanans, if you will. You ever care to comment on that?
Well, I think that the grassroots, they all know people that are from out of state, and in most cases, there's good relationships with out of staters. But it is a little troubling when we have so many out of staters involved in politics, and then they seem to think they want to hand pick who's going to be next. And I think what Rosendale said really rings true. Montana should be picking our future leaders, not our governor or senator, right? And our governor, Greg Gianforte, is not, born and raised in Montana. And I think some people are concerned about that. And certainly, I think that when you look at your family and your roots, you're really going to be committed to support the people's values and what they would like to see the future of Montana. And I do think that matters. And it's good that you brought that point up because I hear it a lot where, out of state influence, people come here from out of state and then they run for office. I think Troy Downing is facing that. He's from California. He tried to explain that he was a Montana resident for 20 years, but Fish, Wildlife, and Parks said when you shot the elk, you were not a resident. And that was back in 2018. And I think people are going to be thinking about that race very closely, and we'll see how Troy does. But I think that out of state mentality pegged to California is going to hurt him. We'll see.
Circling back a little bit to Senator Daines, we did a program. Oh, I don't know how long ago it was concerning the water compact. That's a pretty contentious issue, especially here in the Flathead Valley, because Flathead Valley and Lake County, Flathead County and Lake County, I believe were the two counties that were probably most impacted by that. We covered it extensively here. There was a lot of anger here around this area because they had felt that people were kind of bamboozled or they weren't represented properly. What's your thoughts on the water compact, Commissioner? I know again we've done that show before, but the way that we read it, the way that we read it in that broadcast that we did, was that the water belongs to the folks of Montana, and that really is what should be followed. Would you care to comment on that?
You bet. Um, when you swear into office, folks, you swear to uphold the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution. Keep in mind, the state constitution can be different, very different from state to state, which it should be. And we can meet and have a kind of a constitutional convention and change our state constitution. And I think at some point we need to do that. Our state constitution is very clear. The water belongs to Montana for the use of its people. All right. Well, this is interesting. It seems like when we tackled that in 2015, there was a famous group of people. I call them famous because they stuck together to stand against the water compact. And I think one of the most important is the Speaker of the House, which was Austin Knudsen. I supported him as Speaker. I was very pleased that he was able to take that position. And he was staunchly against the water compact. So was Al Olszewski and myself and Matthew Monforton, right? I served in judiciary where we killed the water compact. And they threatened us with 10,000 lawsuits if we didn't pass it, which I had a very good answer for. Any judge on the bench would simply say the Montana Constitution clearly says the water belongs to the state. Drop the hammer and say case dismissed on all 10,000 cases, right? But it passed because a handful of Republicans that we call rhinos, well, they went ahead and voted with the Democrats and they got the bill through. So those few Republicans, well, I think they're responsible for $1 billion of federal spending, 55 million state spending. Then it goes to Washington and Daines makes a few changes to it. Derek Ski said, well, then it needs to come back to the legislature and be ratified by the legislature in Montana if they made changes in Washington. Derek was right. They still haven't done that. And I'm still trying to say that that should happen. And as lieutenant governor, I have asked Tanner if he'd agree to fight this fight. He says absolutely. And what is a staunch difference is Greg Gianforte has taken credit getting the water compact through and working with Daines. And well, he broke his oath of office when he swore to uphold the state constitution and then openly supports the water compact. So why in the world does the public not take a look at, if you're going to break your oath of office, I think that should be a decision you should make now that you have a chance to vote in the June 4th primary, which I can't stress to you listeners enough to make sure you vote. And the fact is, a lot of people don't vote in the primary. And this is where you get to make these important decisions. Yeah.
Commissioner, what you, of course, before you accepted the nomination as lieutenant governor from Tanner Smith, I'm sure that you probably did an assessment, and because your reputation is certainly important to you, what gave you what precipitated you to want to run with Tanner? What qualities does Tanner possess that you share, that you think moving forward you guys can work together in sort of in a synergy to help Montana?
Well, let's again turn the clock back 6 months. The plan was Rosendale to run against Sheahy because the public didn't feel they wanted our next senator to be picked by our leadership like Daines or Greg Gianforte. Pinocci was supposed to replace Rosendale. I was trying to encourage Al Olszewski to run against Zinke, and Tanner was running against Greg Gianforte. And I felt that really showed that the grassroots was taking a stand against what I see as a current administration that doesn't really represent the values of Montana. The water compact, I think, is a good example, and I can certainly give you many others. So that looked like a great plan, but everything just started falling apart. Rosendale didn't stay in the race against Sheahy. And when he went back to Congress, I certainly didn't want to run against Rosendale. And I felt, okay, we need to focus on at least one race and really try to make a stand against the establishment, which I think is going the wrong direction. So I thought Tanner and I working together would be very effective because I have a good connection to Eastern Montana. And I've been in politics since the early 90s. so I can reach out to a lot of people and across the state and give them that choice. And it's all about choice. Look, a primary gives you a choice to make a change. And that's why I encourage people to vote in the primary. So what happened is Rosendale dropped out of the congressional race completely. And then people wanted me to go back to run for Congress, but it was too late because Rosendale waited till the last minute before he dropped out, before the filing deadline, and I committed to Tanner. And Tanner and I really look at some of the issues in front of Montana very similarly. And I think this race is so important to give people that choice for that change. And this is their opportunity to make it happen. Yeah.
You know, Commissioner Pinocci, I've always known you to be a man of action. The lieutenant governor typically sort of generally is in the background, and the governor is the one that is usually up front and does the press conferences. I don't suspect that if you are lieutenant governor, you're going to operate in that same manner. Have you thought, Commissioner Pinocci, if you get elected on the Tanner Smith ticket, the Smith Pinocci ticket, what type of role do you think that you're going to play as lieutenant governor? Do you have programs that you would like to spearhead? Are there certain things that you would like to use, the sway of your office to be able to influence things for positive change for Montana? Have you thought that far ahead yet, Commissioner?
Well, actually, we made those decisions quite early. When Tanner gave me a call, I had said that I have a certain amount of goals that I had set in front of me running for U.S. Congress. I needed to recognize a director of ag. I needed to recognize a director of Veterans Affairs. And I feel that lieutenant governors in the past really haven't led on anything. I've been watching lieutenant governors for a long time. And to have a lieutenant governor who serves as your Montana Public Service Commission and is trying to lead in energy across the United States, and I do sit on the National Board of Electricity, is an opportunity for us to continue with the issues that I think are in front of us. So I told Tanner, I want to focus on ag, Veterans Affairs, and energy. And that I explained that I had a director of ag who was Jeff Pattison. And I've got a couple of really good veterans guys, Rob Rule out of Helena. And one of the concerns I had is I can't get the benefits to my veterans. We promised them, but I'm giving full benefits to illegal aliens. My suicide rate with veterans is the highest it's ever been. If I could give my veterans the benefits I promised them, I believe I'd bring that suicide rate down. If I could give the veterans the same benefits I give illegal aliens, some of them as known terrorists, I'm certain I would cut the suicide rate more than in half to my veterans. So what I asked Tanner for is I would like an office at the Capitol devoted to Veterans Affairs. We don't have one. We have an office for Native American Affairs. Why not veterans? I have 89,000 veterans in Montana. And Tanner said, done, you're going to run it. Absolutely made sense to him. And then I said, our energy needs in Montana. We import energy from out of state because I don't produce enough electricity. I'm telling you, that is ridiculous. I'm trying to put a turbine at Gibson Reservoir that was designed to put a turbine in 60 some years ago, and they never put it in. I desperately need electricity. When I produce electricity in Montana, folks, it's really cheap. But when I don't have enough electricity and I have to bring it in from California or Oregon, we have to pay 10 times more for it. Sometimes more. Look, if I could produce more electricity in Montana, I could lower the price of your energy cost tremendously. If I could do some more drilling and I get more natural gas, which is a natural effect in drilling, I'll bring our price of natural gas down. So I've explained all this to Tanner, and we have to harden our infrastructure. We have to harden our grid. We need more advanced power lines that are stronger, that prevent fires. that'll be more energy efficient. Power lines leak electricity like a garden hose with holes in it. There's new technology where I can cut the line loss by a third, saving us millions of dollars. So I have all these ideas that I'm going to go forward with. And Tanner says, you go forward with those ideas. I'm going to commit to working with veterans across the state. After I become lieutenant governor, we're going to have that open office. We're going to cut that suicide rate down, and I'm going to get the benefits to my veterans. I don't believe we should have a VA center at all. The VA center, I think, is a disaster across the United States. A veteran should be able to go to any doctor, any hospital they want. We spend probably billions on VA centers. And if we just dissolved all of them and had the veterans go to any doctor they want, any dentist they want, we would clear the whole mess. There's so many ideas that I have and I want to work on. So I'm going to be very active. You bet.
If I can give you another idea here, and of course this is a personal one to me because my mother suffered from traumatic brain injury. As you clearly stated, there are many veterans here in Montana, and many of them suffer traumatic brain injury because of blast injuries, because of IEDs and things like that. Montana, as a state, is the only state in the whole entire union that does not have any funding available for traumatic brain injury. And many times it's the veterans that don't get the care that's necessary. So I would just make a request. I work with the Brain Injury Alliance of Montana. I've worked with them and tried to help them, of course, because I stated it's in my family. That's something that I'd like you to put on your list also, Commissioner Pinocci, as a personal note. And I don't think you'd have a hard time arguing that we have a lot of close head injuries here. They have a lot of motor vehicle accidents because of alcohol, and we're like ranked pretty high in motor vehicle accidents. Not to mention we have a lot of veterans. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and that'll parlay over to my next question. Mental health. Mental health is a serious issue here in Montana, and that is something, not that the government has to fund everything, but if you're going to be handing money out to foreign countries in the billions and billions of dollars, I'd like to be able to see some of that money stay at home here first and help veterans and people, that have needs. Commissioner, would you care to comment on any one of those variety of points I just made?
This is exactly why I believe we need a Veterans Affairs office of some sort in the Capitol. And it amazes me that, current administration hasn't looked at that seriously. And I've got other issues that I didn't discuss. I have veterans telling me that within days of their retirement, they're thrown out of the military and they don't get their retirement. And the brain injuries and the head injuries and even sports head injuries are a serious concern that we look at today that we didn't look at 10 years ago. Football players, especially boxing. Okay.
Look at Todd Foster, right from your own town, Todd Foster.
Personal friend. Todd Foster and I grew up together in Great Falls, and what a success story he had. And but no one ever thought that the brain injury would be an issue, and it certainly has. So with this office, I'm going to commit to you that you and I will work on that together, and I'll promise you we'll come back after we win this race, and we will feature what we're doing to move forward to get that changed. Now, folks, here's something that's important. You hear a lot of politicians promise things, right? And you should be very leery of that when they have no voting record at all, right? All hat, no cows, right? I see a lot of people that, have no voting record, show a picture with a gun and they're military, or they got goggles on holding the gun. Why are they doing that? Because they have no voting record. Jim, everything I've ever told you I was going to do since I've been in office, I've come back and tried to do it better than anyone before, trying to be a leader. So when I say I'm going to do something, anyone that knows me says every time he says he's going to do it or he's going to work on it, that's what he does. And that is the type of decision making that the listeners need to be paying attention to when they go to vote. All right. We're not doing anything in the governor's office with veterans, in my opinion. And I want to spearhead those changes. We're not focused on energy like we should be. I want to spearhead those changes. I want to help with voter integrity. Christian issues. What's happened to the Kolstad family is unacceptable, where a teenager gets in a fight or a disagreement with a parent, the police come and remove the teenager from the house. Look, if we're going to agree with that, every teenager would be removed from every single home in Montana, because disagreeing with your parents is part of growing up. You can't get law enforcement involved and remove the child out of the home. And Tanner and I look at that and say this is unacceptable for the governor and lieutenant governor to be, advocating that the officer should have removed that child from the home. That is unacceptable, folks. And I think that maybe that has to do with an out-of-state mentality, that you support the water compact because you don't really understand you're taking away water rights. And folks, you got to understand a word that's very important called unintended consequences. When we said the Native Americans and the Salish Kootenai would have control of that water, they theoretically could make a lawsuit at the hydroelectric dam saying the water going through the dam is their water and they'll want a percentage of the electricity generated, which if that lawsuit goes through, I'm going to have to up the rates again. Unintended consequences. And the Constitution of the state fixed everything by saying the water belongs to Montana for the use of its people. As soon as you get off track, breaking your oath of office, folks, this government's your government. You get the government you deserve. You better be involved in this race, and you better be voting for Tanner and Pinocci. All right.
Commissioner, something you're familiar, I'm sure, with Senator David Howard. You probably know Senator Howard pretty well. You
Very
probably served with him.
good,
An
man.
honorable man, a man I think of impeccable character, and I think that's not in dispute. He wrote a book, as a matter of fact, with attorney James Rigby about the Supreme Court, about the Montana Supreme Court. It troubles, I know, a lot of folks that the process of bill making goes through the House, goes through the Senate, it's bantered back and forth, gets signed by the governor. 2/3 of the three legislative branches approve something, and then the third branch overturns it, and it seems to be angled towards a lot of Republican-centered bills. The judiciary, I should say, the administrative branch has a lot more control over the judiciary and over that process than they're exercising now, according to Howard and Rigby in their book, which we covered. What is your thoughts? I had Tanner Smith on here, and he said, listen, we're going to do a lot more ignoring of the Supreme Court because where they just issue opinions. That's really what they do. They issue opinions, and they really don't have any way to back them up. They have no law enforcement arm to be able to back up their opinions. Now, I'm not talking about anarchy here, of course, but we need to, I think, address, I believe, the Supreme Court, the Montana Supreme Court, acts inappropriately and outside their constitutional mandates often, and the other two branches of government just let it go. I don't see the Tanner Smith administration just letting it go, according to Tanner Smith. Commissioner Pinocci, do you care to comment on that? I know it's a touchy subject, but it's something that's got to be addressed because we see at the McLaughlin case, with the email case that happened a couple of years ago, they basically just made their own laws, pretty much, the Supreme Court, and that's not how it's supposed to be. Commissioner?
Good place to start, folks, is the legislature makes laws, and then the judges are supposed to follow those laws that the legislature lays out. Well, this is a Republican conservative state. And what's happened in the last few years is Democrats across the state are losing their positions, and it's becoming more of a Republican state. The Democrats then look to the judges to say, look, we just can't do anything because we just don't have enough positions. Now we have a supermajority of Republicans in the House and Senate. So the judges are put on the spot to do something. To do something, they make law from the bench. And some other states have changed their law, so if a judge is caught doing this, that they have to resign. I think we need to focus on that. Austin Knudsen has been speaking around the state, and Austin and I served together, and we have that experience together, and he says that our courts are a tremendous problem in the state. One of the answers that Austin and I agree on is that judges need to pick a party affiliation to run, be Republican or Democrat. And then Montanans would probably vote the Democrat judges out because that's one way to deal with the problem. So we had a bill for party affiliation judges, and it didn't pass. Um, and the public should say, with a Republican supermajority, how did that not happen? Well, you've got Republicans that vote with the Democrats, and we call them rhinos. So we're focused on those races. Lou Jones is the leader of the rhinos. He's got a primary race with James Coombs. I'm excited about that. Ed Buttrey in Great Falls is a rhino, and he's got a race in a primary. Um, George Nicolopoulos in Great Falls is another rhino, and he's got Jim Whitaker, who I'm supporting, and was in the legislature years ago. And what we noticed is Greg Gianforte vetoed a lot of bills that a supermajority gave him. And I believe you'll find probably 40 or more elected officials supporting Tanner and I because they just don't agree with the governor had I think the ability to demand that party affiliation for judges pass, and he didn't do that. And if we could start getting a handle on the judges not making law from the bench, will improve things in Montana a lot.
From what I understand, Governor Gianforte is going to support Lou Jones in that House District 18 race there against James Coombs. That's the word that I'm getting. Talk, if you can, Commissioner, about Tanner Smith. Governor Gianforte, as you stated, has taken some lumps. In some cases, rightfully so. You talked about the case with the child. We're talking about property taxes. I think that people feel that was not maybe handled properly. How is Tanner Smith different in your observations? As when people come to the point where they have to pull that lever, why do you suppose they should be pulling the lever for Tanner Smith over Greg Gianforte, Commissioner?
Well, let's take a look at the Republican Party platform, folks. What Republicans really stand for quickly is lower taxes and smaller government. Government seemed to increase with Greg, and taxes certainly went up. All right, and I'm certain that there'll be people that'll say, well, how can you explain that? And for instance, I regulate utility. Not too long ago, I had to give more money to Northwest Energy because they needed to recover the increase in taxes that they had to pay. And thus, I had to raise your utility rates to have Northwest Energy pay for their taxes. And if you go to the hearing, what I wanted to make very clear is that this is a result of increased taxes, which then I have to turn around and increase your cost of energy. And I believe that Tanner and I can lower the tax spending in this state, and we can get by on less tax spending. All right. And there's another point of view. We have record growth in Montana, record construction, which means there's extra taxes based on that. What are they doing with all the money? Look, my taxes on my home are nearly what I paid for rent 15 years ago. My retired people are being whisked away out of state. Florida is competing for our retired people. They have tax breaks that we don't have in Montana. So some retired people say, the heck with it, we're moving to Florida. There's better tax breaks for retirees in Wyoming, in Arizona. Mexico is getting a tremendous amount of people leaving the United States because they can retire more comfortably. Look, we all say our number one resource is our children. Let me tell you about a number two resource. It's our retired people. So I'm committed, working with Tanner, that a retired person has no taxes to pay on their home where they reside in. Zero. Are you listening? The retired listeners out there should be paying attention to what I'm saying right now. If you're retired, I'm proposing legislation that says you have no taxes on the home you reside in. Because here's what's happening. Taxes are so high, the retired person says, I can't afford to live in the house that I spent my whole life building. I have to sell it and move into a 2-bedroom condo. I don't have my big garage. I don't have my nice yard. I won't have a riding lawnmower. Folks, I'm listening. I'm hearing you. Okay. So I'm committed to having retired people not pay taxes on the home they reside in. All right. So I want to get that legislation through. Uh, there's um, there's so many concerns to bring up. We don't have enough in the show, but you go ahead. What's your next
Well,
question?
we're an energy rich, mineral rich, I should say, state. We have mining capabilities in many different mining substances, as far as silver and gold and you name it. We have lumber. This is a resource rich
Water.
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 Yeah.
We have a resource rich state.
Yes, we do.
Unfortunately, over the years, Montana has been a target of environmentalist groups, radical groups in many cases, and they, of course, have teamed up with radical judges in many cases to be able to stranglehold our ability in the theme of environmentalism. They've tried to keep us from utilizing those resources. I had Tanner on the broadcast, as I stated, and he said that he would have a blanket immunity. He would just disregard some of these court rulings, and because they're opinions anyway, he would disregard them and give the workers that were doing the mining and the lumber, cutting down the lumber, the lumberjacks, he'd give them all pretty much immunity, and if anything happened to him, he would just pardon them. That seems to be a radical step, but when you're dealing with people that act in a radical manner and they've taken over the judiciary system by radical judges, sometimes you have to act in a manner that's that sort of matches their activities. What's your thoughts about that concept, Commissioner, about just continuing to move forward and not listening to the radical end of things and just moving forward and do what's best for Montana, not what's best for groups that are mostly centered in D.C. and not even from Montana that are controlling things? Your thoughts on all that? Because it's been happening for a long, long time.
You're absolutely correct. Folks, when you're in politics, like the Montana Public Service Commission, you're going to find yourself working with attorneys every day. Lawsuits are constantly around us. I have to work with the attorneys, and we look at how a judge performs on the bench. All right. And I have more and more attorneys across the state saying that our judges in Montana are really very radical today than they were a few years ago. And I believe it's because the Democrats are putting pressure on the judges to say, look, we're just losing all these races. You have to fix things from the bench. And I have attorneys telling me that judges are making decisions that they just have never seen before, clearly not following what they should be doing. So for Tanner to have that point of view that we are going to have to look at dealing with this problem in a different fashion, I think is absolutely correct. And that's what I like about Tanner. And I think Montana needs that attitude right now. And I don't believe our current governor is really doing enough to expose the problem with our judges around the state. We had voter integrity law passed, and a judge in Billings just threw it out. Judge Moses in Billings is a perfect example. This guy's out of his mind, blatantly making decisions against what the legislature said. But we don't really have a tool to deal with it. Travis Butcher, a few years ago, had a bill that basically said if a judge, it wasn't a bill, it was, his idea was that if a judge made law from the bench, he could be replaced. Okay. And it was a ballot initiative. And a judge in Great Falls said they collected the ballot signatures incorrectly, and it was stricken from the Secretary of State to be counted. The ballots were already printed. The initiative was on the ballots, and Brad Johnson to this day has to keep quiet on what the vote was. But I'm going to bet 80% of Montana wanted judges to step down if they made law from the bench. So we really have to be doing some different thinking. So I support what Tanner's doing. I think we need to bring a ballot initiative back where judges make law from the bench, that there's some sort of consequence to that. And I'm seeing judges make decisions across the state that we have to take a serious look at.
Here's if I may, here is a much simpler solution. Ignore them. They have no law enforcement ability. They control no army. They control no law enforcement, no police force. The administrative, the executive branch controls all that. So literally, if the governor ignores the Supreme Court, the governor would have to have its own police force arrest himself to throw him in jail because the Supreme Court or any court has zero authority to do anything, law enforcement authority. So the simple plan is ignore them and let them send the army, which they don't have. So that may sound radical, but listen, that's what I would do if I was governor. I would just disregard them and say, okay, we'll send the police. They don't have a police. Anyway, that's I don't want to get on that soapbox, but it really troubles me the way that they act and how they act. I think outside their constitutional authority, and the other two branches of government don't seem to do anything about it. But I think the Smith Pinocci ticket will do something about it. I really, really, genuinely do.
I promise you.
Yeah, I know you will.
I promise.
I know. Commissioner, what else is, there's so many issues, and of course we can't cover all of them here on one interview, but what are some of the topics and the issues that most concern you? Again, being a lifelong Montanan, being in Montana politics for many, many years and being able to kind of see inside how the sausage is made, if you will. What is your greatest concern here, or I shouldn't say concern? What is your greatest goal, your biggest goal as lieutenant governor? What type of areas are you going to be most concerned with? You covered the veterans earlier, but what is most important to you? You get in first day in office. What are you going to start doing immediately? The first 90 days? They usually put aside the first 100 days, I think it is. What is your first 100-day plan as lieutenant governor? Have you thought that far ahead?
Great question, and I have a very good answer for that. Energy is my top concern. Folks, when I go to Washington and we look at energy, the Western United States just doesn't have enough. The proof is we've had brownouts. What a brownout is when they say, wow, the energy demand, everybody's got the lights on and the air conditioner. We don't have enough power. We have to make a decision where we turn the power off. That's called a controlled brownout. One day, Montana is going to go asking for electricity because we don't have enough, and we're not going to be able to get it. If that happens in the middle of winter, folks, that's going to put you at risk. So one of the first things I want to do, which actually I'm working on right now and have been working on for several years, is getting a turbine put at Gibson Reservoir. I can start generating electricity as soon as the turbine's in. That is run by the Greenfield Irrigation District, okay? And I've been working very closely with them, and they're putting transmission line in right now, okay? So that's going to be the first priority. And I have another dam that needs a turbine. And then we got to talk about Colstrip. Can we turn units 1 and 2 back on? Well, they're going to say absolutely not because of lawsuits, and we're going to have carbon emissions. I brought in a special team of people from the University of Illinois. They say they can put a carbon capture on it and have 0 emissions, and then the carbon could be sent to the Bakken oil field through a pipeline, which could be poly pipe. It doesn't have to be metal, and we can pump that gas, that carbon, into the oil wells where it percolates more oil. Carbon, by the way, no one ever talks about the carbon that you have at McDonald's every time you get a soda drink. The bubbles coming out as carbon. No one ever asks, what's the carbon footprint of McDonald's or Burger King or Arby's or the soda pop industry? There's a market for that carbon. But truly, folks, I have got to get energy under control. Montana needs to be an exporter of energy, not an importer.
That's right.
And I will lower the costs, create jobs, first priority. Okay. Then I want to work on veterans. I want to work on lowering our taxes. I want to work on some Christian issues like the Kolstad family issue. That's very important to me. I'd like us to do a separate interview on each one of these subjects with you, Jim. So I want to do a show concerning energy, concerning taxes, concerning Colstead. And let's talk about voter integrity. Okay. You know, it amazes me. I've watched Greg Gianforte and Christian Juris travel the state. And when voter integrity comes up, they say, Christy Jacobs is doing a great job, nothing to see here. Let me tell you something, folks. When I was Conrad Burns, the statewide director, they paid Native Americans to vote 2, 3, and 4 times. I think the check was what, Jim? $45 each?
$40 each. I produced it on my show and did several reports on that.
We've got copies of the checks. And there are people that tell me we have no voter integrity problems in Montana. Look, I don't believe Conrad Burns lost the race. Thousands of additional votes showed up on the reservation. An FBI investigation. We have a book called Arrow Through the Heart by Christy Cortlander. I've got my own copy. All right. So we have tremendous problems that we need to fix in Montana. Brad Cheetah, my seatmate from 2015, who furiously fought the water compact with me, tells me something like more ballots were sent out than registered voters in Missoula. There was a whole investigation. A judge throws it out. Again, a judge throwing it out, folks. And it's like Christy Jacobson, and I'm expecting the governor to really do something there. And they basically say nothing to see here. Folks, look, you got to vote June 4th, and you got to tell everybody they got to get involved with this. Every single veteran should be voting in this election. June 4th. Every single retired person who's upset with their property taxes need to be voting in this election, June 4th. Please, folks, make sure you're voting. Okay.
Commissioner, in 43 states, the governors and lieutenant governors and the legislature have moved towards sound money. We see the Federal Reserve, of course, printing trillions and trillions of dollars. We're up to $34 trillion in debt. You can see the price of everything at the grocery store, to the gas pump, to energy, as you spoke of earlier, has done nothing but go on an increase in an upward trend on the graph. One of the solutions to that is sound money, using gold and silver as potential currency, or at least one option for people that want to use an alternative currency to the increasingly being inflated U.S. dollar. What is your thoughts on that, Commissioner, about using gold and silver? I'm not saying that's something that we could do overnight, of course. It would have to be transitioned in. But is that something, as Lieutenant Governor, that if that came across your desk, or if that topic was brought up to your administration, is that something that you would seriously consider moving towards sound money here in Montana, or making that an option?
Well, folks that know me know I'm a gold and silver collector. Okay. And I have looked at other states who have been passing legislation to be more gold and silver investment friendly type states. Utah is doing a good job on that, for instance. And I want Montana to be a leader. And one reason I want us to be a leader, folks, is we have a tremendous amount of gold and silver to mine in Montana.
That's a good question. That's a good point.
So that's one reason. But any of those that are gold and silver collectors should give me a call, just simply because that's what I like to do. So when I look at our race for Congress in Montana, I look at it very closely because I was going to run for Congress. And I don't know, we have like 8 or 9 people running. Some of them have never served in office before. And I travel the state listening to people speak, because I have to be there to speak. And I'm very disappointed in everyone running for Congress. And I'm going to tell you why. And if you people running for Congress are listening to this, you better listen close. The number one job in Congress, when you run as a congressman, your job is to set the budget for the most expensive, powerful country in the world. You hold the purse strings. Not a single congressman running in Montana, 8 or 9 or 10 of them I've met, have even said that in a single speech. They don't start to explain what their job is. And the value of the dollar is at the lowest point in the history of this nation because of our debt. Congress has got to get that under control, right? So gold and silver becomes very attractive, and I encourage people to have a good amount of it saved up, because if the dollar completely falls apart, the value of gold and silver is going to go up. So if a person said, look, I've got $1 million saved, I'm a retired person, and I have it all in the stock market, I will say, please take half of it out and buy gold and silver. Because if the stock market crashes, you're going to lose everything. And I'm not going to tell you to put everything in gold and silver, but I certainly am going to tell you should diversify. And as a state leader, a lieutenant governor and governor, I want us to be able to move our retirement into metal, not necessarily gold and silver. There's some metals that cost more than gold and silver. But I want you to have the ability to trade in gold and silver and not have any roadblocks in front of you. And also, if I get people more excited about understanding gold and silver, they might understand that we have to get our spending in this country under control to bring the value of the dollar back up. One of the best ways I can teach that is to say, you better have some gold and silver because our dollar is at a very, very serious time where it could just simply fall apart.
Since we don't give financial advice on this broadcast, I'd like to perhaps have Commissioner Pinocci amend that. If he had $1 million, that's what he would do with his money. We, of course, don't suggest you do anything here as far as financially. Consult your financial advisor before you do anything with your $1 million. And if you have $1 million, good for you. That's good for you. Commissioner, is there anything that you would care to say here before we go ahead and wrap up this broadcast? It sounds like we have many broadcasts in the future that we're going to be covering, and I'll be delighted to be covering those with you as we go forward. But do you care to recap and summarize what we've talked about today and what type of things we can look forward to as we move forward doing these podcast interviews?
Well, I sure encourage you and I doing some more of these interviews on different subjects, and I'd like to bring some people on to talk about what the governor has done wrong in the last legislative session. So I have some ideas of bringing some elected officials on with me to talk exactly about that. I want you to know, folks, that it is important to be able to stand up to government overreach when you need to. I have a lawsuit with the Department of Transportation over your First Amendment rights and your property rights. And I can't think of another public service commissioner that's ever filed a lawsuit.
That's the sign issue, right? That's the sign where they wanted you to take the sign down. Yeah, I remember that. I covered that, I believe, and did a report on that. Yeah. I'm glad we need to get a recap on that. If you can, before we go, give us the recap. What's going on? I know they sent you a letter, and they kind of threatened you and said they're going to go on private property to remove a sign. Anyway, give us a recap on that, Commissioner.
Well, folks, here's a good example where if you see government overreach, you really have to take a stand. How many elected officials do you know are willing to do that? Well, I'm doing that right now. And what happened was a landowner had a Pinocci sign up, and the Department of Transportation sent him a letter and said they had to take the sign down. They said that it was a political sign and it must come down. Well, the sign didn't say vote for Pinocci. It didn't say elect Pinocci. It simply said, I'm your public service commissioner. But more importantly, the landowner said, look, it doesn't matter. I can have any sign up on my property I want. Then the Department of Transportation put this in writing. They said they were going to cross his property line and remove the sign and then send him a bill for it. I called the local sheriff and I said, that's trespassing. Wouldn't you arrest that person? And the sheriff said, if the landowner said that happened and wanted to press charges, I absolutely would. So we had an incident where the sheriff said they would arrest the Department of Transportation employees. Imagine if you and I worked for the Department of Transportation and they said, you're going to go on somebody's property and remove a sign. I'd look at you, Jim, and say, buddy, we could get shot. I don't think we should do that.
Yeah, exactly.
They put that in writing that they were going to do it, and we could do a show where I could show you the letter. Well, I got with Matthew Monforton, again, a gentleman I served with in the legislature as a great legislator. And we fought the water compact together, and he took the case, and we're suing the Department of Transportation in federal court. And I think that the Department of Transportation wanted to dismiss everything, and I said, not so fast. I want to know why the Department of Transportation sent the letter out just to people who had Pinocci signs up. I have dozens of photos, Trump signs, Biden signs, Max Baucus signs. He's been out of office for years. There's still a Max Baucus sign up. Signs for Al Olszewski that are still up, Matt Rosendale, Zinke. But they just sent the letter to the Pinocci
Well,
land.
let me spin back
That's
around for a minute.
discrimination.
It is. It didn't. If I remember correctly, didn't wasn't it a Gianforte sign for like years, and no one said a darn thing about it until it became a Pinocci sign. And if I remember
That is
correctly, can you?
absolutely
Is that
true.
right? Can you? My memory is kind of foggy
No,
here.
you're absolutely right. So this happened. The first letter was sent to Jeff Pattison. He has this building out in a wheat field. It's this old wooden building, and I can, when that we do the next show, we'll send a picture of it. And there was a Greg Gianforte sign and a Christian Juris sign on it. And Jeff Pattison said, "Why don't you take that sign down? And I want you to put the Pinocci sign up." So we took an 8-foot Greg Gianforte sign down. Underneath that sign was about a 3-foot Christian Juris sign, Lieutenant Governor. I removed that and put it inside the building. And it's an old building. Cows are in there, running around. And I put my sign up. The Greg Gianforte sign was up at least 3 years. Okay. And, Ed Butcher is convinced that Greg Gianforte told the Department of Transportation to take the sign down, the Pinocci signs down. So we've asked for a FOIA request, basically asking for emails and phone records and text messaging. And is there any communication between the Department of Transportation and Greg's office or the sheriff's office, my buddy Jesse Slaughter, who I'm very upset with right now, and to see if they were instructed by someone to just take the Pinocci signs down. And guess what? They told us no. So now I'm looking forward to a court order of some kind where we've got to get that. You and I have fought the email records before.
Wait, you mean you tell me that they are not going to release? They're not honoring your FOIA request. Is that what you're saying here on today?
That's what I understand. So now I'm trying to encourage my attorney to get a little tougher on that. I don't believe the Department of Transportation sent a scathing letter out to risk violating people's rights of freedom of speech and property rights. I believe that Rick Fisher, who signed the letter, was told to do this, and I want to find out who told him to.
Well, we will find out in court, as they say. Commissioner Randy Pinocci running for Lieutenant Governor on the Tanner Pinocci ticket. We do appreciate you joining us here on the broadcast, and obviously, as you can tell during the interview, folks, we'll have Commissioner Pinocci back on probably several times for interviews. TannerForMontana.com. TannerForMontana.com is the website, and you can go there and find out everything you need to know about Tanner. And more importantly, donate if you don't have time to help knock on doors or help put out yard signs. Donate to campaigns for people that you support. If you can't support them physically, support them financially, because that's how we win. So we want to appreciate you. We appreciate you joining us here today on Valley Broadcast Network. We want to thank our guest, Randy Pinocci, candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Until next time, this is James White for Valley Broadcast Network, saying bye now.